Hello, my name is Jessica Lusardo, and I'll be presenting my research on the Appalachian dialect. Will it fade to memory or remain standing strong? I want to begin with presenting Appalachia. Where is it and what is it? Appalachia is a mountain range located in eastern North America, and it spans from Newfoundland, Canada, all the way down south to Alabama in the United States. This region is famous for its mountainous terrain, isolated populations, and peculiar speech patterns. This region is very large, spanning two countries, so it's safe to say that not everyone who inhabits this region speaks the same or shares the same cultural points. That being said, for the rest of the presentation, I'll be focusing on Southern Appalachia. That includes Kentucky, West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, as well as Georgia. Due to its unique characteristics, Southern Appalachia has been a point of interest in popular media, both past as well as present. Some examples of some past popular points is the infamous Hatfield and McCoy's family feud. This is an actual feud that happened in the late 19th century and lasted for many decades, and it's only until recently in the 21st century that these two families actually settled their differences. This feud became a popular dinner show in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and it's also been reenacted in the Hatfield and McCoy's TV drama series. Also, another interesting point is the moonshining industry in Appalachia. During Prohibition, the moonshiners who drove the alcohol off the mountain into the cities, this way of driving is actually the seed to NASCAR driving. Another interesting point is advertising from Southern Appalachia. A popular soda drink, Mountain Dew, it's not the same today as it was before. As you can see from the original logos, Mountain Dew really paid homage to its Southern Appalachia roots in its advertising. Present day, Southern Appalachia is home to many beautiful scenic byways, including the Blue Ridge Parkway on the left-hand side, as well as the Tail of the Dragon on the right-hand side. The Tail of the Dragon is a very popular point for motorcyclists, as it is only an 11-mile stretch, but it has 318 curves. So it's very dangerous, but it is a popular touristic spot. Appalachia is also home to many popular artists. The most popular of them all, in my opinion, is the great Dolly Parton on the top left. And we also have up and coming new artists from the area. One example is Tyler Childers. Tyler Childers is from Eastern Kentucky, and Dolly Parton is from Tennessee. But what do we know about regular Appalachians? What do we as a society understand about their life? Their life that doesn't include popular feuds or famous ads. And unfortunately, we don't know that much. For the rest of this research, I really want to focus on the sociolinguistic aspect of Appalachia. I want to focus on the language that they use and how society views them and how they view themselves. I feel like it's important to research this because it really shines light on a certain region of the United States that is usually forgotten unless it's part of a trivia question or a pun of someone's joke. I really want to show appreciation towards a group of people that has long been marginalized by society in general. So, to begin, I'll start with language. The way they speak, is it really a dialect or is it just a very strong accent? According to the Oxford English Dictionary, an accent is a way of pronouncing a language that is distinctive to a country, area, social class, or individual. A dialect, on the other hand, is a form or variety of a language which is peculiar to a specific region, one that differs from the standard or literary form of the language. These two definitions do sound like it's two sides from the same coin, but I really want you to focus on the key words in these definitions. An accent is a way of pronouncing language, whereas a dialect differs from the standard language. So, bottom line is that Appalachians do speak in a dialect. Appalachian English is, in fact, a dialect. Appalachian English is a non-standard dialect of American English, and compared to present-day use of American English, one could say that Appalachian English is out of date or may sound older than other regional American dialects. To give some examples, I'm going to show vocabulary. Tote a poke would be to carry a paper bag. When it's airish outside, it's chilly. When something is plumb exciting, it is too exciting or very exciting. When you want to talk about distance, it's over yonder or yander, depending on where you're from, which is over there in regular standard American English. And a holler is a valley. You live in the holler or you live in a valley. Some examples of grammar. There were many examples that I found through the research, but three kept popping up over and over again. The first and most popular were a prefixing. A prefixing is when you put the letter A before a verb. Some examples of a prefixing can be a running, a coming, or a going, as you can see in the poem. Another example is the regularization of verbs in the past tense. Now, all of that to say is that verbs in the past tense sort of follow the same pattern. They follow the ed pattern in English. So instead of I grew up, would be I growed up. Instead of he knew he was right, he knowed he was right. Or instead of I saw it, I seened it. Another example are double modals. Now, double modals is something that is common in Southern English, but it is rampant in Appalachian English. A double modal can be I might could go to the store, is used to express a conditional force or indirectness. Another way that Appalachian English differs from standard American English is phonetics. And there are quite a few pronunciation rules that differ from standard American English. The first is the A ungliding before a voiceless obstruent. I am not from Appalachia, but I will do my best in pronouncing these words. Right, as in that's right, would be right. Bite, bite, and tire, tar. A second, a second example is diphthongization. Now, this is sort of the opposite of the first example, where something would be considered as one syllable, they will change it to two. Two examples of that for bit would be biyit and head, heyid. Again, I'm not from Appalachia, so if you're from Appalachia, please don't take offense in my pronunciations. And a third example is the unstressed first syllable ending with ERs. And those I have here, potato, tater, tomato, mater, tobacco, backer. Vocabulary, grammar, and phonetics, pronunciation, are three pillars of language. It's the main way of telling the difference or comparing a language from another. And as you can see, Appalachian English does have some major differences from standard American English. They're both English, but the way it's used is different. Appalachian English is in fact a dialect and not just an accent or a way of pronouncing words. Now, how do all these three factors affect outside society looking into the Appalachian culture or the Appalachian population? Well, dialects thrive in physical and social isolation. In other words, Appalachian English wouldn't be what it is today if not for the fact that it was so isolated in its formative years. Also, non standard language varieties are usually associated with low social status groups. In other words, if you don't speak standard English, that dialect that you are speaking is usually viewed as not educated or lesser than compared to standard American English speakers. A popular comic called Snuffy Smith really focused on Appalachian English, the way that the people were perceived and the way that the language was perceived. Here we have Snuffy Smith himself, as well as his wife Louise, and the youngins, um, Jughead and Tater. As you can see, if you aren't from the Appalachian region, you sort of have this concept of the language as well as the people that live in that area. But an interesting irony in this is that as someone who lives in Appalachia and leaves Appalachia to, say, get a better education, when they come back, they're sort of viewed as getting above their raising. In other words, when you come back to Appalachia, if you speak that standard American English, you're viewed as conforming to society and not sticking with your roots. You're not remembering where you're from. In a documentary that I viewed, one of the participants, Bertie Burleson, she was quoted saying that when young members of her community came back home and started talking like Yankees, they would all make fun of them until they had to broke or until they succumbed to the normal way of speaking of that area. And this is interesting to note because a community this strong with a dialect this strong can affect people who leave and come back. All of this to say is that Appalachian English is not just an accent. It is in fact a dialect. As you can see, this dialect is peculiar. It is a little strange than standard American English. And unfortunately, its peculiarity has had negative effects in the education system. Teachers usually view this as uneducated or coming from a low background, like I said before, and it's not uncommon, or it is common, for educators to try and erase the mistakes that students are learning at home because they believe that they're learning an incorrect form of English. And Appalachian English isn't incorrect, it's just another way of speaking English with rules and vocabulary that is distinct to a certain region. Like I said, Appalachian English grew and flourished through isolation. But as of recently, isolation is not a key aspect of that region anymore. Through mass media, technology, and a lot of outsiders are coming into the region and affecting how people speak and how culture is perceived. A very interesting documentary that I viewed, it's free on YouTube, called Mountain Talk. It's a very personal documentary. And towards the end, a lot of the people being interviewed started to state how they're concerned for the well being of this dialect in future generations. Some quotes are, as I list here, there's nobody living when I was young. They're all dead. It's coming from an older participant. Another participant stated with the older generations, the dialect, the language, in terms of being spoken on a daily functional basis, is going to be gone. And something that really hit home, very simple, was my son, he don't talk like me. This change in speech can really be attributed to mass media, like we saw in previous slides, like Snuffy Smith, the comic series, the original Mountain Dew logo, Deliverance, the very, very popular thriller film from the 70s, gave a negative view of the Appalachian region. And this quote from Meredith Carroll, a columnist who wrote about her college days outside of Appalachia, where she said she learned about powerful stereotypes that Appalachia had arrived in places like Boston well before her and had influenced the way that the most considerate people would even think of her. The banjo lick from Deliverance backed many introductory conversations of when she said where she was from. And she goes on to describe how the stereotypes that kept outsiders laughing were keeping her down, and how her accent, vocabulary, and way of speaking made her stick out like a sore thumb, and how, in order to fit in, she lost her voice. This can be related to the previous slide I just showed about how the older generations would mock or tease the newer generations when they come back home from college or from wherever they went to try and get them to speak like how they grew up. But in this case, the author lost her voice once she left Appalachia because she had to fit into the society, or she had to fit into the standard American English. Another example is Hillbonics. Now, this isn't a very popular term, but it came about through the case in California about ebonics. And online, people would either take an opportunity to mock other people's way of speaking, but at the same time, others took this as an opportunity to affirm their way of speech. This knowledge that negative stereotypes exist can actually increase the level of in-group solidarity. So even though society as a whole has a certain viewpoint of Appalachian English, that doesn't mean that it will break that community. With all this negative media attention about the Appalachian English dialect, some made in good jest, others in a way to harm the viewpoint of this area, Appalachian English is still very much alive. There have been many groups that have started to promote Appalachian English in society. One example of an organization is Foxfire. Now, this organization is nonprofit and it prides itself in collecting and sharing stories and knowledge of the people from Appalachia. They were able to release an encyclopedia set featured here, and they were even able to start and open a museum and heritage center located in Mountain City, Georgia. This is an outdoor museum where you can walk a trail and visit intact cabins from different parts of Appalachia that, if not for them, would have been destroyed and forgotten. And even more up to date is the podcast It Still Lives, which is running currently, and they have weekly podcasts where they post their interviews and people can talk about daily life things. A personal favorite of mine was their Christmas special, where for 30 minutes they had stories of different Christmas traditions and what they would do in Appalachia for the Christmas time. On an academic level, there's actually Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina, and that university also hosts the Appalachian Journal, which is an interdisciplinary, peer reviewed quarterly that posts poetry, prose, research, interviews, and other types of scholarly studies. So, in my opinion, with all of these organizations and journals that are trying to keep the dialect alive, there shouldn't be any reason to negate another person's way of speaking. In fact, all these organizations and the rise of technology can actually be used for the Appalachian dialect. It can be used to appreciate this culture, to appreciate this way of speaking that couldn't have been done before. The effect of media on Appalachian English has come full circle and it's back in the hands of Appalachians. Prior to this, the way that people perceived this language was through jest, through comics, through media, and now it's back into the hands of Appalachians. They're the ones that can say, this is how we speak, this is how we live our lives, and this is us. This is Appalachia. And this has to do with keeping the dialect alive because it is a dialect. And just like language, dialects evolve, languages evolve. English isn't spoken the same way it was spoken 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. So it would be wrong of us to think that Appalachian English wouldn't evolve as well. It's okay that this dialect is changing. It's okay that pronunciation may be softening with this newer generation. But change doesn't equate erasure. And through these organizations and through activism of keeping this dialect alive, I believe that Appalachian English is not in fact going to disappear, but it will remain standing strong.